Welcome everyone to this Parent Like a Pro event. We're so excited to have you here tonight. This is our community event to celebrate our third birthday. And it's so fun to be able to celebrate with you with all these super informative events. So while we have more people tuning in, I'm going to go ahead and introduce myself. I'm Maristella Lucchini. I work at Nanit. It's been almost 2 years. I work in the research department. My expertise is in sleep, particularly in the perinatal period. I have 3 little ones of my own. 2 are not that little anymore. They're 9 and 7. And then I have my little one who is 2. So I've been through this perinatal period a few times myself, and I've worked with a lot of new parents throughout my 10 years of research. But I'm super excited to have here with us Dr. Liza Natale. She has tons of expertise as a pediatrician, and I'm going to let her introduce herself and tell us a little bit more about her.
Thank you. So as Maristella mentioned, my name is Liza Natale. I am a pediatrician in New York City in private practice. I also work on the scientific advisory board at Nanit. And I have a particular interest in sleep and helping new parents figure out ways that they can sleep and their babies can sleep. And I have 2 kids who are not such kids. They're 17 and 20. And I will be starting my empty nest in the fall. So
Oh, wow, I didn't realize that. Amazing. Well, so now hopefully sleep is not your problem anymore. But great. Oh, we have more people tuning in from Nashville, again from Florida. We have 2 July 25th due date, guys.
both in Florida.
That's funny. Okay, so I'm sure more people will connect as we start our conversation. But I really wanted to kick off with a general question list, and then we're gonna sort of dive into the details. But I think as many people are sharing that they're expecting their baby or they just had their baby, what are some things that you generally tell new parents that they can do and that they should be thinking as they prepare to have their baby? And it can be their first, their second, whatever. Every baby, there's some new preparation that needs to be done. What are some of your general recommendation? Where should we start?
So one of the most important things that I share with parents is to figure out what types of support they need, they want, and who they can get that from. So we don't necessarily know in the moment what everyone's strengths are. So having a conversation with your partner about, how helpful their parents might be or not be. Do you want them to stay with you? Do you not? Things like that we don't necessarily talk about, and a lot of assumptions are made. So I think it's very important to think about the mundane stuff as much as the fun stuff. So, who's going to be, when we go to the hospital, we're delivering in the hospital, like, can your mother come over and walk the dog? Or can your mother come over and clean the house and get it ready for us? And, things that we need that make us feel good and cared for, which I think is really important. And one of the things that I will tell families all the time is that we used to have our babies in a community so that we were with all the women in our family or in our community, and we had a lot of support from them. And now we're sort of expected to raise them in a silo by ourselves. And it's very overwhelming because we still want to do everything that we're doing when we're not postpartum, doing it when we're postpartum. So it's a lot about that, and a lot about asking people, feeling comfortable asking people for help and using each other to tell those who are not so helpful back up a little bit.
I think it's so interesting. And as you were talking, it reminded me so much, and I'm gonna make a comparison and try to understand where I'm coming from. Or like the preparedness in front of natural disasters, that you're not gonna be able to react when you're gonna hear the news that a hurricane is coming and be ready to react, right? Not because your child is gonna be a natural disaster, but your brain, after you give birth, you're so exhausted, you're in the middle of this or like hormonal third, and you need to have this conversation before and be prepared and have a plan. And not because everything is going to go according to that plan, but it's going to be so much easier to have those conversations, not when you're in the middle of this whole thing of having this new baby, when you want your energy to be able to focus on the baby and not on like who's going to walk your dog. And you're not going to have that, um, that bandwidth once the baby comes. So definitely, I agree that the idea of preparing before and of being, free to communicate. Very often it's hard to say, I think your mom, she's great at helping us clean and prep the house, but maybe it will be a little hard to have her right after I give birth. And it can be a little hard to have this conversation, but it can also be much harder not to have them. And I think that sometimes we have to learn to communicate, and having a baby brings in so many necessities and new needs, and it's important to start to talk before. So I think, what you're sharing, it's super interesting, and we have a pull up, so please guys feel free to um dive into this poll so we can get to know you better. And also, sorry, I didn't say this at the beginning, but we really want this to be a very open and sort of back and forth conversation with you guys. We have some topics that we're going to touch on at the beginning, but feel free to um, type those questions either in the chat or in the Q&A, and we're going to get to them either while we talk, if they're relevant to the specific topics, or at the end, we have some time for Q&A. So type away. We really want to hear from you.
And Marcella,
Yeah.
one of the things you said also is that um, a lot of it can be couched in a way. So an example is my mother-in-law was a pediatric nurse. She was great. She was super helpful when my first was born. My mother, not so much, but she's a great cook. And so I asked her if she could make home cooked meals that I could put in the freezer so that each, we could eat food that wasn't carry out or, frozen, well, frozen, yes, but home cooked.
Homemade.
And that made her feel important and made her feel good. So it doesn't necessarily mean it has to be like, oh, I can't stand your mom in my house, but it can be done in a positive way. And I really do think it's so important to have that support.
Absolutely. No, I think is a great way. How you put it, like to figure out strengths and make sure that everybody's involved in the best way. I think is such a great suggestion, and same for partners, because very often I think like a lot of the partners really want to help, and then at some point they really don't know exactly what to do. So having these conversations before can make everybody feel included and part of the process. And I think like we were having this conversation a few days ago, thinking about planning, and you had some interesting thoughts about that, like how there should be sort of a balancing act between trying to plan and sort of going with the flow. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Because I think now there's a lot of talks about birthing plan and plan for breastfeeding and plan for this and plan for that.
Well,
Tell us your thoughts.
invariably, Murphy's Law holds. So if you plan too rigidly, I find that it always goes, in a different direction. I think that like anything, it having a baby is not something that you can control. You can't control your labor as much as you want to. You can't control the delivery. You can't control what, how this baby's going to behave in the first, I don't know, 20 years of their life. No, that you can't. In the first, in the beginning. And so I think it's really important to have a plan and a goal, but to be very flexible, because I think one of the things that our body is very much connected to our mind, which we know. And if we're very stressed about a specific way, our body will sometimes be stressed and shut down. And so an example Maristella mentioned was breastfeeding. We absolutely support, women as a pediatrician, we support women's desire to breastfeed, but women who go into it like more tense sometimes have more struggles than people who go into more relaxed. And we know that because the first time around, like when women have their second baby, it's like, oh my God, this is so easy. I can't believe it's so easy. And it's like, this baby is such a better nurser. And it's like, I think it's a combination of your energy, your
More
comfort,
confident.
your
Yeah.
ease. And as a lactation consultant, I work with, I'm just throwing this out, says, you know, your breasts are just like your mother's and your grandmother's and your great grandmother, like our breasts haven't changed, but our anxiety around it and not living with all the women in our tribe has.
It's such an interesting topic, and I think like I remember when I had my first daughter, she was born a month and a half early. And in the beginning, she just couldn't breastfeed. She was so teeny tiny. She would get so tired. And I remember feeling very disappointed about it. And so stressed that I couldn't provide her. Like I felt like she was already like so tiny and I couldn't do my best. And really, I had a wonderful, amazing nurse that I will thank forever in my life because precisely she really helped me to sort of understand that in that moment for her, the best thing was just to get stronger. I tried my best to pump, and then like little by little, she gained weight. But I think like my position had shifted so much to welcome her as she was in that moment and welcome also myself. I was exhausted. I was going back and forth to the NICU. That discharged me. So sometimes I would just did not have the strength to pump. And I was pushing myself so much in the beginning that I was just exhausted. And then eventually when she grew bigger, she ended up latching and being able to breastfeed. But it was such a journey for myself to be able also to accept those times where I couldn't do it. And I wanted to bring up one study that we did at Nanny, which I loved so much. It was one of the first things that I did here that was looking at confidence around feeding. There's a lot of conversation like how much sleeping of the mother is impacted if they're feeding or if they're pumping or if they're giving formula. And one of the things that we saw is that actually one of the things that was impacting sleep more was not the feeding, like, how they were feeding, but how confident they felt about sleep feeding. So if they were feeling like, they were doing their best and that their choice was like the best for them and for their child, they were sleeping well. And I think that for me, that was such an interesting finding. Sort of a liberating thing, right? So we really need to figure out what works best for us and for our baby and for our family. It's not going to be the same, as you said, it's not going to be the same with your first child, with your second child. Sometimes it could be easier, sometimes it could be harder because maybe you have another, little one that you need to care for and you need some flexibilities. And, so I think it's such an interesting topic. Oh, wait, I see some comment here. I wasn't able to breastfeed my first baby, tried pumping and was exhausted, not being able to produce enough milk for him. Hopefully, with the second time, it will be different. Do you have any suggestion that you would want to give around this, Liza?
Well, without knowing sort of the specifics, and I'm
Yeah,
not asking you to
in
include
general, yeah,
because there are some reasons why women may not produce
yeah,
adequate milk. My suggestion would be to go into this postpartum period not feeling defeated or that it didn't work if you want to try. If you don't, if you want to give bottles and formula feed or pump or whatever it is, that's also an option. But if you want to try trying to go into it sort of as an experienced mom who knows how awesome her child is, who didn't necessarily breastfeed, but maybe doing something prenatally with a supportive, kind lactation consultant who can help set you up for
right,
success
yeah.
from day one.
That's also something that I was thinking about, that I remember with my first child, I sort of didn't prepare. I didn't know exactly also the resources that were available both at my hospital and through my insurance. And I think that especially here in the US, there's so much that is related to insurance and where you're cared for and what's the network, what's so like, all these things. It's a good thing to be prepared before and knowing what are your resources. You might end up not using them, but if you need to, you know what will be available for you. So that's also something that could be done sort of proactively, and to
One,
prepare.
one of
Yeah.
the other things I want to mention is that even if you have not had a baby, we are all kind of animals at our core, and we know how to take care of our young. Do we know how to do it perfectly? No, but we learn. No such thing though as a perfect parent. But if you're talking to someone and they make you feel good about your decision and they're positive and they're helpful, or what they say makes sense, then it probably makes sense and it's probably helpful. If something doesn't make sense and you're trying to like put a square peg into a round hole and you're trying to figure out, I don't get it, that doesn't feel right, that does, it probably isn't. So there isn't one way to parent, there isn't one way to do anything with there isn't one type of baby, there isn't one family dynamic. I mean, it's all very different. And so don't underestimate your gut and
Mm.
how much you know just having, you know, carried the baby, or if you're not carrying the baby, having the baby, it's just, there are instincts that we have and we
Yeah.
tend to overthink things, and we don't trust our gut.
Yeah. I think that one thing that helped me also with all this stress about breastfeeding was a lot of skin to skin contact as well. When I could not breastfeed my daughter, just having that, part of the breastfeeding is really sort of this closeness, having them sort of close to us. And I think that that's something else that, we could, that you can start to do as you try to figure out this journey. Just keep them close if you want to have this intimate relationship with them. And I think that's also something that can be valuable for partners, and it has great benefits for the kids. It helps them regulate, calm down, regulate their temperature. I mean, I did it in the beginning a lot with my preterm babies because it's something that really helps them, but it helps at any stage, at any age, having sort of this close contact in those first few weeks of life. So definitely that's something. Um, I think like we've talked in general about sort of the support system. Is there something that thinking about, those families where there's like a partner that maybe like thinking how the partner can support the birthing parent, like there's something particular that you have noticed or some recommendations that you would give?
So I think one of the important things is to, right now, for those of you who are pregnant, and even there's one mom with a 3-week-old, or dad, but um, when you're pregnant, there's a lot of attention on you as the pregnant person. There's a lot of excitement about you, and oh my God, you look great, or you look tired, or have a seat, or what can I get you? And it's really lovely. And then once the baby is born, there is a little bit of a like, okay, thank you for your service.
Bye.
And now we're going to focus on the baby. And I think it's really, really important for your partners, and those partners who are on the call, to tend to mom, the delivering parent, because it doesn't go away, that need for kindness and support. I think that the baby the baby will be fine. I mean, someone's going to be caring for the baby. Mom sometimes may feel like, I'm exhausted, I'm in pain, I'm supposed to do all of this stuff that makes me a good mom, and nobody's sort of looking after me. So, one of the things, if there are any grandparents on this call, what I tell grandparents all the time is, you take care of your baby so your baby can take care of their baby.
Yeah.
Because I think it's really important. And I think for partners, that is the biggest thing, that like, I think, a lot of partners are trying their best to be supportive. And I think sometimes women have a hard time asking for what they want. So it's like, tell me what you need. What do you need? What do you need? And maybe having that conversation before you have the baby of like, I love coffee. Can you just make me a coffee every morning? I hate walking the dog. Can you walk the dog for me? So it's like, just, you know, anticipating, presumably you've been with this partner for a while, at least 9 months, anticipating what they may want and what may make them feel special.
Right. That's such an interesting. Yeah, I was thinking about my experience, and I've also seen like such a journey with my husband. Like I think in our first kid, we were 25, and I could see him really wanting to help and just having no idea what to do. And then I like the second and the third time around, uh, although it was much more chaotic, we were definitely much more of a team. He just needed, he just knew a little bit more what I needed, and I think that have definitely, I I mean, with the benefit of insight, of course, it's so easy to say we should have had this conversation, but that's also something that I always am like, oh, I wish, like, we talked about who was gonna, how we're gonna handle night feeds, right? Um, I just assumed, oh, I'm gonna do the night feeds, I'm the mom, but then I was exhausted, and actually, it really helped me that he was doing some of the night feeds, and then it depends. Like with our first child, he had zero paternity leave, so he was working literally the day after. With our third child, he had 2 months of paternity leave. And so, of course, also his involvement changed. And I think, like, depending on everyone's situation, there can be different combinations of how we can help each other. But being there for the mom, it's so important because like we get one appointment at 6 weeks, not much more than that. And we don't get asked a lot, how are you doing? So it's good to have someone sort of checking in. And I think that sort of it's a good bridge to the other question that I wanted to ask you, because I know that you've been like a super strong advocate of, pediatricians help supporting mom's mental health and sort of doing this check-ins because not a lot of other people are doing it. And so, I mean, hopefully everything will go well. But it's also good to have a little bit of preparedness of what could be some sort of red flags um, that could prompt some further question. And I think that's very important again, because there's a lot of changes. So there's going to be a lot of things that could sort of disguise as normal changes, but that are sort of a little borderline. And so it's good to know, when should I start to, ask for a little
Mhm.
extra support?
And I think, so there, people have probably heard of postpartum depression, people have heard of postpartum mood and anxiety disorders, which is really more accurate, because postpartum depression implies that there's a lot of, just down, sad, depressed mood. And very often we see a lot more anxiety postpartum than we do true depression. There's also postpartum blues. Postpartum blues are typically in the first 2 weeks, and it's kind of like a little bit more irritable, maybe some insomnia, some anxiety, some, maybe you're fighting a little bit more with your partner. And that usually goes away within about 2 weeks. The sort of cure for that is stuff we've alluded to, which is support and sleep, mom sleep. So I mentioned, like in terms of what Maristella had talked about with, we hadn't talked about night feeds and I was exhausted and I needed support. In my feeling, a good mom is going to take care of herself first because she is so responsible for the baby, that if you're up in the middle of the night, you can't be your best self during the day. And you want to be your best self, you want your baby to be their best self. So if you have somebody who can help you at night so that you can get sleep, so that you're not feeling so on edge, it's a tremendous help so that you can enjoy the baby more during the day. I think that we sometimes, and I'm going to tease Maristelle a little bit because she said her husband had to go back to work, implying that being home with your baby 24/7
It's
isn't.
not relaxing. It's not.
And I tell parents all the time, unless surgeon, pilot, maybe someone who, like a police officer, like, okay, they need their sleep. But if someone's going to the office and they can have a lunch break and they can pee in peace,
They can handle.
they can handle a night shift. Um, I think that when that anxiety, that sort of intrusive thoughts, that constant worry about the baby. Oh my God, the baby has a little red spot. What if let me Google it. What if that's, something dangerous? Or, oh my God, nobody can be with the baby except me because I'm the only one who can take care of the baby. I mean, you're feeling that, like, that you can't sleep, even if somebody responsible is taking care of the baby, that you can't fall asleep. So it's heightened. Intrusive thoughts, for those of you who don't know, are like, we all have occasional intrusive thoughts. It's like you're riding down the highway and you're like, what if I just turned the steering wheel to the right and drove off the road? And then you're like, but you're not going to do that because you're driving straight, you know. But if there are a lot of those, and those are signs of postpartum mood and anxiety disorders, and that does need more support. Speaking to, you know, a psychologist, speaking to a psychiatrist, speaking to a counselor, speaking to, you know, most people will go to their gynecologist, their obstetricians. Some of them are more well versed than others, so it's a starting point. There are some online resources as well, but I think that it's not just snap out of it, you know, come on, you should be happy, you should be, you know. And what we do in our office that Maristella was mentioning is a questionnaire called the Edinburgh screening. And the reason that we do it is because usually if you ask someone who just had a baby, how are you? They're going to say fine, great, I love the baby, you know, and they're not going to say like, oh, it's been really hard. And so this allows people permission, allows new moms permission, because we're asking for it. We're not, it's not just like a in passing, how's it going? And you say fine. So you know, it's really intended to open up the conversation and to be as supportive as we can. And I'm hopeful that more and more pediatricians around at least
Yeah.
the country are doing that.
Yeah, and I'm seeing a comment where like a friend's daughter also experienced postpartum rage, and I think that like we didn't even know it existed, and I think that brings up sort of this topic where like it's not gonna show, not everybody are gonna display symptoms that are like what we would expect, you know. Maybe like the rage is for all this tension, as you're saying, like you're on edge. Someone might display with like super stress and anxiety for every little thing. So if something doesn't seem like it's okay, it's always better to be proactive and reach out, and maybe it's nothing. um but again, like it's always good to have this open conversation if we feel like something is not right. And one interesting thing that not many people are aware of is that also fathers can experience, and like number birthing parent can experience postpartum depression. A lot of like maternal postpartum depression is also tied to the big hormonal shifts, sort of tied together with like the sleep loss. So there's a lot of concurrent factors. A lot of the same things also fathers are going through them in a different way. And so if if others are experiencing some of the symptoms of being completely sleep deprived, sort of some sort of rage, not being able to feel at all bonded with their children, it's also it's okay, it happens. And so I think that's something that very often people are not even aware of, and so they don't reach out for help. So
And
we yeah, go ahead.
oh, I'm sorry. No. Oh, I was just going to say, when you mentioned the question regarding postpartum rage, it is a wide range of presentations. That's sort of an intense irritability, which is a sign of depression, but also there can be psychosis associated with postpartum mood and anxiety disorders.
Yeah.
And so it can really be quite extreme. It's very one of the sort of best things, if there is a best thing about postpartum mood and anxiety disorders, is if treated, it is one of, if not the most treatable form of mental illness. So it is really that is quite amazing. And for people who are breastfeeding, or sometimes you can have some of these symptoms when you're pregnant, there are things, medications, things you can do that are safe during that time. I also wanted to mention, when we were talking initially about birth plan, it's somewhat linked to postpartum anxiety, because when we are disappointed, when something doesn't go kind of the way we had hoped it to go in the first couple of days postpartum, that increases our chances for postpartum mood and anxiety. So if we, you know, want to have vaginal delivery and it turns out that the baby's in distress and they have to do a C-section, and a new mom feels like so disappointed in herself or the situation or whatever it is, that can be a trigger. So when you're thinking about birth plans, you want to think about being flexible with yourself so that you're not as much mindfulness as you can do so that you're not in a situation where you're putting yourself at risk for that.
We have an interesting question from Brendan, who asks, how do you ask your wife how she's feeling to make sure she's not going through postpartum depression? I'm going to give my perspective, but then I want to hear more from you. One thing that I've experienced both on myself and then on all my friends and the people that I work with is sometimes to be able to not ask a general question. Try to understand and ask some more specific questions, like, have you been able to get sleep? Have you been able to eat today? Have you been able, like, and because I feel like sometimes when you ask a very general question, exactly as you were saying, it's sort of easier to dismiss. But when you ask some specific questions, or like it's a little easier to sort of have a more specific conversation. I don't know if it's clear what I'm saying, right? So rather than just asking, "Oh, yes, how is it going?" Um, and I think, as going back to what we were saying before, setting up these conversations before, right? So not out of the blue, but like saying, having this conversation with your partner before, like, I know you're very stressed. I know that you really want to have vaginal delivery, and I'm gonna be there to support you, but whatever is going to happen, I'm going to be there with, like, trying to set up some of this conversation so that we're prepared to handle some of the things that will come up, rather than just sort of pop up a question when you're after 1 month your baby's born. But I don't know, these are some of my personal experience. I want to hear from you. What would you recommend?
So I think one of the things that you may run into if you're making assumptions, if your partner is anxious or depressed, that they sometimes they may feel defensive, like it's a criticism of
Right.
who they are and how they're
Yeah.
mothering or fathering. And so I think sometimes also, because there's a lot of self-doubt in those situations. There's a lot of like, I'm not good enough, I'm not good enough. And so sometimes pointing out like what a great job they're doing. Like I'm so impressed with
Yeah.
you. I'm so impressed with like that labor was intense. Wow. And like like
Yeah.
just being a cheerleader and not,
Celebrate. Yeah.
if you're in a good headspace, obviously you're going to have emotions about all of this too. If you really think that it's getting to a point where you're sort of frightened for your partner and you know that they can feel better, I think sometimes saying it outright, like, I am really worried about your mental health. I'm really worried that you are depressed, you're anxious, and I want together to go with you to talk about this because I want to be able to support you and help you because I know how hard this must be. So
Yeah.
it's making it less about like you have a problem and
You're
which
doing something
just
wrong.
by the
Yeah.
nature of your question, I don't think you would do that. I mean,
Of course.
but
But sometimes, like, even without meaning to, when I think we says it, as Brendan was sharing, when we don't know how to say it, we might come from the best place, but it might come out wrong. And when we're also sensitive and sleep deprived, I think it's very important to come from a place where of support and saying, like, I've seen, I mean, what you've done today is amazing. Like, I know last night was so hard, and still you were so, thoughtful the whole day, and you were able to give the baby a bath today. Oh, wow. Like, there's some things that feel like such huge accomplishments, like those first few days when you're just trying to get by. I think it's a great suggestion to come from a place of support, and everything. I mean, it's just received. I think will be received so much
and I
better.
and I think I just noticed something pop up that I wanted to
Yeah.
that um, women are not always the best at being
Yeah.
forthcoming with negative feelings. And so, and also after you have a baby, like, in our intellectual smart brain, we're like, oh, I should be happy. This is amazing. Oh my God, I have this incredible baby and look what we did. But in your emotional brain, it's not jiving. And it takes time. Like, you don't love something the first moment you see it. You're going to love it, but like it takes him, her, it's going to take time. And I think that having some patience for yourself and each other with that, like, we'll get there right now. And you know, babies in the first 3 months are a little bit, or first 2 months are a little bit like parasites because they take from us. We want to give it to them, but they take, so that's a little different, but they take from us, but they don't really give back yet. As soon as they smile at you, it's like, oh, that was all worth it. Because it's like you, like they're making a connection. But there are lots of things that babies can't do early on. Like they don't rely on their sight like we do. They rely on touch, smell, and hearing because those are senses that they've already been using in utero. Their eyes, they've lived in a dark cave. So they're not going to recognize you. They're not going to look at you. We're used to like, my baby's not looking at me. You know, why don't you like me? But you know, the skin to skin that Maristella meant, like they know your smell, they know your touch. Those are things that are, you know,
Yeah.
important. So sometimes like your baby's gonna love you no matter what, you know, that's just how it goes. Like your bad singing, like all of it, they're gonna love you, and just to have some grace for yourself.
Yeah. I'm reading some of the question. I was struggling with bonding with my second baby. I had a hard time saying it out loud because I felt such a level of guilt. And then once I was able to hear from other moms that I had experienced something similar, it felt a lot better. And I think this is why it's so important to have these conversations, to know that this is part of a journey and that all these journeys can be slightly different, but um, it's normal to encounter some obstacles, and they don't have to prevent you from having a beautiful experience. Um, as you're saying, in time, sort of at your own pace. And I was gonna share something from my last pregnancy. So when I had my third kid, I knew it was gonna be my last baby because I had a surgery and I could not have babies anymore. And I mean, I knew it was the right thing. I was fine. I was like, I have three beautiful babies. I've been so happy. And I didn't even realize that in me, it felt so weird that it was gonna be my last baby. And so every time I was putting away clothes from like newborn, I was like having a horrible day. And I couldn't even explain that myself, right? Because as I think we were saying, I was sort of hiding this, like, how can I be upset? I have three beautiful babies. I should be, grateful and everything. But sometimes if we cannot control the things we feel, but we just can't control those feelings. And I think that like we can't feel guilty because we feel something like that. It's how we're going to act on it, how we're going to work on it, how we're going to grow with it, how we're going to ask for help, that determines, the moms that we can be, not that first reaction that again we can control. It's sort of of a natural thing that can happen, and everybody, depending on where they are in their life, can have different different reaction to the birth of their child. And I think that even between all if you have more than one kid, they can feel such different journeys, which I think it's so interesting here. They were talking about their second baby, like maybe you were approaching that second birth as like, oh, I already know it, and then things go a little different, and it makes it feel so harder. Yeah. And I think like we have some I was thinking about this transition. We have some parents connected that are going to be parents for the first time. We also have some parents that are expecting their second child. Do you have some particular things that you would want to share for maybe parents that already have a child that it's their second time around versus parents that it's their first time, based on your experience, like to make these transitions a little smoother?
So with the to make it smoother is tricky, but I think it's important to remember or to know that toddlers, for those of you who are having second children, toddlers are very narcissistic. And so the sun sets for them and rises for them, and the earth rotates for them. And because they are the center of our universe when they're our first. When the second comes around, I sort of liken it to if your partner comes home and says, like, I have another spouse and you live with us, and I love them as much as I love you, and we're going to live happily ever after. You may not be so keen on that. So I think it's important to let the toddler come to the baby on their terms. It's not like here is your baby sister or brother. We're going to be a big happy family and we're going to love each other and it's going to be great. Like, and usually the toddler will start to like act out against mom a little bit because something has changed, especially if mom is nursing. But I think what can be helpful is before the baby is born, that, so I'm going to use mom and dad as an example, if it's, depending on what your family situation is. But so if mom stays home and dad and toddler leave mom at home. So very often mom might leave and go to work, or the three of you leave and go out together and then separate. Or, you want to leave mom specifically at home and go for, take a walk or go to dinner or have a date, something, so that there is that the toddler is used to, like, oh, I leave with other people besides mom, because mom might be resting at home, or mom might be home with the baby, or mom might be in the hospital for a couple of days. And I think that not over talking things. I think that sometimes the way that we teach our kids now is more about, like, let's talk a lot about it so that we can prevent the bad feelings that you might have, or the jealous feelings, or the scary feelings, or whatever it is, instead of letting them have the feelings, experience it, and helping to support them at that time. So there's nothing we can prepare, the same way we can't prepare for our first delivery, there's nothing we can do to prepare our toddler, who can't even think of, 25 minutes from now, that, like, there's going to be a new person in the family. But to, like, just, what, you seem really upset and you want a little more attention from mommy. I can understand that. So I'm going to give, or sometimes older toddlers around 3, they're rule followers. So it's like, if they have, like, sort of structure to their day, so it's like every morning mommy and 3-year-old have breakfast together. That's never taken away, because you know that your partner or somebody can be with the baby, and so that they're used to it. So they're not always, like, pulling at your pants, like, what about now, mommy? What about now? What about now? And I think they don't understand and process things the way that we do. Children generally under 2 will have no memory of being an only child. So so they're not going to be scarred from it. Nobody's scarred from a sibling, by the way, but, like, they're not going to have that awareness. They're just going to be really self-focused in that time. And I think that sometimes I just see about reading books. You can definitely read books, but sometimes if it's not right in front, like, the beauty of toddlers is that, and children, babies, they live in the moment. They're not thinking about what happened 10 minutes ago and what's going to happen in 10 minutes. As parents, we're thinking in the past and the future to prevent things from happening. Like, oh my God, I learned from that and I don't want this to happen again. With toddlers, they're like, so when you're fighting with your toddler to put their jacket on when it's warm in the house, I can understand that, because they're like, it's warm. I don't know why you're making me wear this heavy, well, a lot of you in Florida, so probably not a heavy down jacket, but up in New York, heavy down jacket. And so what I'll say is, like, walk outside, it's a little cold, and they're like, oh, I want that jacket. So it's like we're planning, but they're kind of like, we can learn
Responding.
a little from them, which is nice. But so if they're curious, like, oh, mommy has a really big belly. What's inside mommy's belly? Oh, there's a baby in there. Oh, let's, for sure. And then I think it's a good idea to have a present from the baby for the sibling, and to have some little things stuffed away in the closet for those friends who bring a present for the baby and sort of forget to bring a little thing for the toddler. So that's with siblings. And then with first ones, the question about sort of how to prepare is,
Yeah, I think we have covered a lot for the first parents. But again, if you have specific questions, drop them in the chat. We're keeping an eye on everything. So I want to make sure we cover this other topic, because we're, like, at 7:46, time flies. So do I need to have a sleep schedule for my newborn? Big questions. So since we're both so interested about sleep, let's dive into this last 15 minutes. Do we need a sleep schedule for my newborn?
so you can have a sleep schedule, but your newborn will not follow it. We are all very scheduled. In a perfect world, that would be awesome. But the reality is that when babies are first born, they're nocturnal. They're up a lot at night. They sleep a lot during the day. In general, you want to help shift that day-night cycle. But I think it is most important to start to learn your baby's sleep cues and teaching them how to be good sleepers. So from day one, you know, you're holding your baby and they're like constantly falling asleep because newborns are going to be sleeping like 16 hours a day. And they're just adjusting to the world. And I think it's really important to recognize that their sleep schedules are very different than ours, and they're not going to have like 3 naps a day. You know, that's when they're 6 months old, 7 months old. But in the first, 3 months, it's very hard to have a schedule. What I usually will say is, look for their sleepy cues, which are not yawning and fussing, but are kind of when they're like, and putting them down when you can so they learn how to fall asleep on their own. And just recognizing that, you will see that they will create their own schedule. So you will see like, oh, my baby's wake window is about 40 minutes. Oh, now my baby's wake window is about an hour. Now my baby's wake window is, and you're going to start to see those patterns. But the baby's circadian rhythms are not exactly 24 hours, and they tend to, if family comes over and it's a chaotic day, that might throw things off. And so I think the expectation of being able to like feed them on a specific schedule and sleep on it is a little bit of a setup. Some babies will follow it well, but most won't.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting. One thing that I would say, you were saying about, their circadian rhythm, so their night and day recognition, something that I would usually recommend is to make sure that they stay exposed to the light during the day. So the naps during the day, just have them sleep. I mean, the little ones sleep anywhere, literally. So they can be in the living room while everybody's there and they will be fine sleeping. Let them be exposed to the light. That really helps them to regulate and sort of get entrained in this night and day rhythm, whereas during the night they should sleep in the dark. When they get a little older, that changes, but definitely for the first 6 months, they can definitely sleep in the light, and that will help them set up their circadian rhythm. It's true, like here someone says, there are some babies that have more obvious cues. For some others, they kind of, it's a little bit more sudden, where they when they feel tired and they start all of a sudden they're overtired. I think that there is some usefulness in trying to understand at that age, usually around how the wake windows can be helpful to know roughly around that age on average. What's the wake windows for babies, especially when you're a first, parent? You have no idea how much they sleep, how much they stay awake. Your baby's not going to stay awake for 40 minutes, but knowing that in general, around that age, that would be a normal pattern. It could help you understand some of those signs and picking up on those cues. You know that around 35, 30 minutes, you can start to take a look and sort of feel like uh it might be coming. um and so
And
I
I
just,
think
yeah, go ahead.
I think we focus a lot on thinking that babies only cry when they're under 3 months for 2 reasons. They cry because they're hungry, or the other reason I hear all the time is gas. And very often babies are crying because we don't deprive our babies of food. We're very focused on feeding our babies. That's the first go-to. But it's often fatigue, because our lives feel very boring when we're just sitting at home, but they are taking in so much new smells and touch and sounds, and their eyes are starting to work, and so it's so stimulating. It's like going to Disney, and like you're like, no, no, I still want to be here, and then you crash because you're just overwhelmed and exhausted. It's that's every day for them. So in the beginning, like they may be awake for a feed and then go back to sleep. Around 1 month, 45 minutes to about an hour. I'm just skipping a little.
Yeah.
At 4 months, it's a max wake window of 2 hours. So you can kind of fill the gap in. And fatigue really is like that quiet, like relaxed moment of just that's tired. Crying, fussing, yawning, rubbing your eyes, kind of those twitchy, jerky moves. That's adrenaline. That's overtired. So it's hard to fall asleep when you're like standing guard that the lion is coming to attack. You're agitated. And that's when a lot of people need the like, and all of, the moves. But I think that sometimes, and babies are born with maternal melatonin levels, but those drop off. And so that's where like sleeping in the light, the dark, they don't get melatonin until closer to 3 months again. So they're not in a rhythm like we are.
Yeah. I see two interesting questions. One is about the shades, and as I mentioned before, during the day, especially in the first 6 months, leave them exposed to light during the day, so that it helps regulate. And then we have a question about a 3-week-old that really wants just to be held between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. and how hard it is to stay awake. You want to make sure you don't fall asleep while you hold them. And saying, I'm afraid when I have to go back to work, working night shifts, it will be hard for my wife. I have two thoughts, and then Liza, I really want to hear from you. One is like, I think this is when it's really important to take shifts. I think like, we might be able to stay awake for 1 hour. It might be, you could figure out if it's maybe better that during 1 hour, one of you take a nap and then you take turns rather than sort of staying both awake, or like, and then also the other thing is, if everything goes well, it will not last forever. Like those first couple of weeks are really hard and they are settling, they need a lot of contact. But normally in time, it will get better. So I just wanted to give a little bit of a positive plug, because I feel like when you're in it, it feels like it will never end. And generally, it's not like that. Little by little, that will grow, that will start to get a little bit of rhythm. Again, as much as possible, keep them exposed to the light during the day. And if there's any opportunities also for you to take naps during the day, so that maybe you get to that 10 p.m. slightly more rested. I know it's so hard, and hearing sleep when baby sleeps is like the things that every parent is like starts to itch, because it's so hard to do that. But I also wanted to just say those that witching hour, it's so hard at the beginning, but then it tends to get better. But I don't know, Liza, if you have some sort of specific thoughts that you would want to share.
So two things I want to mention. One is that if this period never dissipated and went away, we would all be only children. This happens in most scenarios, and 3 weeks is tough, because 3 weeks is when we start to see the witching hour, when they're
Yeah.
just primal scream the end of the day. There's no real reason. Sometimes in extreme cases it becomes colic, but not always. But I think one of the most important things that you can, well, two things. One is you want to try during the day, when your brain is functioning better, to look for those sleepy cues. When the baby is like, spaced out, swaddle, because at 3 weeks the baby still
Swaddle.
likes that
Yeah.
cozy feeling. Now, I usually recommend the swaddle with the hands up, because if you look at your baby when you're holding them, this is where
Okay.
they want to be, in this cozy position. They teach with the arms down. I don't know why, because it's not really comfortable, and then they're fighting. But babies want to be back in the womb. So they want it, not really, but they want to be tight. So don't feel like you wouldn't want to be in that swaddle, but they like it. It makes them feel secure and good. And when the baby when she's starting to get kind of zoned, don't do a whole routine, a diaper change, of this or that. Just swaddle and put the baby down where you're not walking away. You're right there. You can rub their belly or whatever it is, but just shielding them from your vision, your eyesight. Because when you look at a baby, even at 3 weeks, close up, and you're like, "You tired, baby?" They're like, "Nope, I'm ready. I'm ready. What are we going to do now?" So if you just put them down when they're in that zone, white noise can be helpful. Kind of that shh
Yeah.
sound can be very helpful. Again, reminiscent of the womb. If you need to rock the stroller, but what you're doing is you're teaching the baby how to fall asleep on their own. Because when in the night, if you're holding the baby, they're always falling asleep in your arms, contact napping. If you put them down to sleep, they don't know how to do it. They're used to you comforting them. And so teaching them when you're sort of awake and capable of doing that can be helpful. And then the other thing I was just going to mention is that, like, when my younger ones, babies, my husband and I, instead of shifts each night, we did one person did one night, the other person did the next night. So I could get through any night knowing, oh, the next night
I will.
he's doing it. And so when I could sleep, it still was painful, but it wasn't like, because if you think about it, like, you're not even getting a sleep cycle if you're not getting more than like 3-4 hours of sleep in a stretch. So you're not going to be restored. So that's another option. But I do think working on sleep during the day can be very, very helpful for night.
Yeah, and sorry, I think one question is like, shouldn't we shouldn't start swaddling? No. She was just saying around 3 weeks, that's a good time when you can swaddle, but you can start from the very beginning.
Day one, like
Yes, exactly.
swaddling from birth until about 3-4 months.
Yeah, when they're able to start rolling. And so yeah, but anyways, again, I think just sort of keeping the perspective that that's part of the journey. It's not going to be the whole journey. I know it's really hard when you're in it, but we'll get there. And I think like I know we got a little bit to this thing of like also for parents, how can they sleep? And I think, you know, you were sharing you did like alternate nights. I usually went to sleep very early. I love going to bed very early. For me, I'd have no problem going to bed at 8 p.m. I would go to bed at 8 p.m. and sleep like, I don't know, until 3, and then we would shift and my husband would sleep from like so I think, but whatever works. And again, like, you know, this participant was sharing that they have to go back to night shift. So of course there are some situations that might be a little tricky. But or maybe if you can have some people that can help during the day, come for like a couple of hours, you can take a little bit of a longer nap in those first, like, it's very hard to sort of reserve time for sleeping because we feel like we have so much to do. But someone else can do the laundry for you. You cannot. Someone else cannot sleep for you. Um, so yes.
And one last thing I just want to mention is a lot of times parents think that sleep is a luxury and that, like, I don't want to, you know, I should be awake all the time if my baby needs me, and why should I need sleep? And sleep is a medical, I mean, we are a chronically sleep deprived country, and we
Yes.
would all
Like
feel
eating.
better and be
Yes.
healthier if we slept better. And
Yeah.
so it's something like your baby needs sleep, you need sleep, like it's like food, you know.
Yeah.
It keeps you healthy.
And I think someone is saying, do you recommend one parent doing all the feedings one night versus both parents alternating? I think it will depend on your feeding plan, like how you work out the feeding decisions. I think in general, if possible, trying to get through, as Liza was saying, at least one sleep cycle. So try to, whenever, if possible, try to get like 4 hours sleep continuous, because the problem is not just like how long you sleep, but those stretches so that you're able to really get a restorative sleep and not just like little chunks of half an hour that don't really help your brain get sort of fully restored. So for different families, things might look different depending on your situation, but aiming for like these 4 consecutive hours of sleep would be ideal.
And I just
Um,
want to mention, because I think the person who asked that question was also the person who had a question about supporting their partner. If you are concerned that your partner is developing postpartum anxiety or depression, then I would say they should sleep the night.
yeah.
You know,
Yes.
they should get
100%.
8 hours. Because
Yeah.
that, when I got a full night's sleep the first time, because a friend came over and stayed with
Oh,
my husband, I was like,
you feel like a new person.
person. I was like,
Yes, yeah.
oh God, now I know it, you know.
It's it's me. I'm back.
Yeah.
Well, so as I told you, time flew by. We are at 8 p.m. and it's been super interesting. I'm so glad for all this interaction. I hope this session was informative. If you have more questions, let us know. We'll be happy if something was dropped in the chat and we weren't able, our staff was able to put down the questions, that let us know. But we have one lucky winner. I think it was already posted. It's Brendan Dexter. Oh, I don't know if you
Ah,
already put in the chat, but so congrats, and we'll email you all the information. And check out our next event in the community. And thank you so much, Liza, for helping us today and sharing all your wisdom. And thank you all, guys, for connecting. And we'll see you soon. Bye.
Bye.